4 years ago, the country witnessed the tragedy of Marikana, which saw 34 miners shot down in the northwest mining town by the police. The incident is generally referred to as the Marikana Massacre and has political and economic implications that have not yet been resolved. The executive director of the Marks Foundation is John Capel, who joins us on the show. John, pleasure to have you with us once again.
Tim, thank you for having me.
Well, 4 years is relatively a long time. There were specific things that were supposed to happen since then until now, new housing, new employment contracts and so forth, and certain practices having to be done away with. In summary, as far as you're concerned, what has happened in the intervening period from the day of the tragedy to now?
Well, I think there was a window of opportunity for a lot to happen across the platinum belt,
yes,
with all the big platinum producers. I don't think they've taken advantage of it. I think the housing promises that have been made have not materialized. If we look at Lonmin, they've probably built about 500 houses, fully knowing that workers don't want to buy houses, can't afford the houses, that workers want alternative rental, subsidised accommodation. I hear they're doing, on a very small scale, they're starting to address that.
But they were supposed to build how many? So just for
well, originally, between 2007 and 12, they said they were going to build 5,500 houses, and they built 3 show houses.
Okay.
But
so now it's 500, right?
Now they've built 500.
Yeah, okay.
So we're looking over a long period of time, we're saying, well, they've achieved nothing.
Yes.
You know? They've got a workforce of 33,500. In the hostels, they accommodate 2,600 because of the conversion process. In the past, they could accommodate about 15,000 workers in the hostels. So really, we're looking at a problem of about 30,000 of their workers. Where do they live?
Yes.
They live in informal shanty towns,
Yes.
in backyard shacks.
Yes.
But without access to proper running water or electricity. They live in appalling conditions.
Yes.
But this is also true across the platinum belt for Anglo Platinum, for Aquarius, for Impala, for all the mining companies. It's not unique just to Lonmin.
Well, and you mentioned those things because they are very important to the events that led to the incident, right? That the mine workers had gone on strike because they were demanding better wages and living conditions. So in order to avoid those kinds of situations arising again, then the companies were supposed to provide them with housing, right? They made the promises then.
Yes.
So that has not materialized.
That has not materialized.
Yeah.
The companies are claiming poverty. Lonmin said at the Marikana Massacre they just don't have any money at the moment.
Yeah.
But really, over a period of 20 years, the platinum sector, up until 2008, made returns on investment of 30%, which is very high against a global average of 8%.
30% year on year.
Year on year. So
Yeah.
they were creaming
Yeah.
the profits.
Yes.
And those profits were all going off to shareholders elsewhere around the world. Everyone else was enriching themselves. That money was not being put back into communities, towards workers, towards accommodation. So they had an opportunity to do all of that, and they haven't done it. And then at the same time, there are a lot of retrenchments taking place across the platinum belt, just worsening the situation. And I believe that we need to bring all these big platinum producers together. We need to look at a holistic, integrated development plan around housing, around what workers need. We need interventions, short-term interventions in the informal settlements, giving people access to running water and sewage systems in the meantime. And then considering what kind of model does one develop. Now, yes, there are some talks in government, the Presidential Commission on Housing, but there's more talk than action.
Now, on the part of the state, from then until now, how do you rate the performance of the state in terms of the commissions, the investigations, and the implementation of whatever recommendations from, for instance, the Falam Commission?
Okay. We just started with the Department of Mineral Resources. They failed to regulate. All these companies get their license to operate in terms of social and labor plans, which are largely non-existent, are cut and paste jobs, are not monitored by the Department of Labor, and the housing forms part of those social and labor plans. So that's where the first problem arises. Who's monitoring, who's regulating? The Falam Commission has come and gone. It's made its recommendations. It's put a lot of blame at the door of Lonmin. and at the police, but especially at Lonmin. And we've got to ask, what kind of lessons are Lonmin learning from this? What we're finding is that one has to apply a lot of pressure on these corporations to bring about some sort of fundamental change. And these corporations will only change if they feel that there's a risk to their operations. They will change in small cosmetic ways. If you go down to Marikana, I was there on Tuesday, things are just the same as they were 4 years ago.
Yeah.
So the material conditions of workers have not changed.
But one would have thought, John, that that was a big tragedy, enjoyed wide coverage around the world, movies or documentaries rather produced out of this. It's now a discussion point everywhere else where economic injustice occurs, and everybody knows about it, may not know the exact incidents of the day, and therefore should have jolted our consciences into action and a serious transformation of how certain sectors operate, particularly mining. Do you observe any change as a result of this tragedy that has occurred in mining in South Africa?
Yeah. As I said, small cosmetic changes, but nothing major that needs to be done to start to address, for example, around the platinum mining houses, the youth unemployment rate is 60%. The youth cry out, they don't get jobs in the mining industry, that they're excluded. So it's a very big problem. There's very little development going on. The kind of community spend is very, very low. So we need to see a more integrated approach. We need to look at waste management issues around mining, how one can turn that into job creation initiatives. We need to look at agricultural development around mining. We need to look at a whole host of things. There's some talk taking place now, mainly between civil society and the corporations, but not so much with government. Government operating more behind closed doors. Marks Foundation does participate in some of those discussions. I think there's some good thinking there, but it's the implementation. And we seem to be lagging behind in implementation.
John, what would have been a more reasonable outcome of what transpired 4 years ago until now, given the amount of deliberations, talks, meetings, engagements that have taken place? What is it that you believe or think that would have been reasonable by now, after 4 years after the fact?
I think, number one, that the informal settlements are communities that workers live in, that the fundamental problems of lack of access to water, to proper sewage systems, those kind of interventions could have been made. Some of those communities don't have access to water daily. Interventions could have been made in that regard. When I was down in Marikana on Tuesday, I look at all the electric pythons going overhead, but the communities don't have access to electricity. So they're living in appalling conditions. Now, why can't we start to turn that around? Is the corporation more important than these communities? These same communities and workers suffer the impacts of mining, but they're not benefiting from it. We should have set up a wage sustainability fund in the industry. We could have set up a housing fund. The only player doing anything constructive at the moment is AMCU. They've set up some kind of fund for the widows and orphans, and that's a whole other question of compensation. No one's been compensated.
No one?
Well, I mean, Lonmin have offered the widows jobs in mining, put their children into schools, some into boarding schools, some into township schools. That in itself is not good enough.
Yeah.
The widows at the memorial said, no, we want more, we want compensation.
Yeah.
So that is being discussed. And we also, Marks Foundation is discussing that also with one of the biggest buyers of Lonmin's platinum, BASF, in Germany. So we're trying to put pressure on BASF, to put pressure on Lonmin, for them to do their own human rights due diligence in and around Lonmin's operations, to see who their supplier is, to promote a human rights sort of approach to development in these areas.
John Capel, thank you very much for talking to us.
Thank you, Tom.
And unfortunately, regrettably, not much has happened, according to John of Marks Foundation, since the tragedy that occurred 4 years ago. And of course, this is a story that's going to stay with us for some time to come. We'd like to hear your own comments on how the state, as well as the companies, the government and companies in the Marikana area, have dealt with the Marikana Massacre situation, write to us. The address is tonightwiththimmodise@gmail.com. And of course on Twitter, we are at Tim Modise. We'd like to hear your views.